Director of Local Government Services for the Department of State. And I want to thank you so much for being here at the 3rd Annual Local Government Innovation Conference hosted by Secretary of State Rosado and the Division of Local Government Services. We look forward to a day of activity that we hope will inform and inspire you. Not only do I want to thank you for being here today, I want to thank you on behalf of my staff and the state for the tremendous job you do as local government officials. We have something for everyone in this conference because we chose our topics from the plans we put together from the Governor's Countywide Shared Service Initiative, which many of you we had spoken to over the phone quite frequently. So we thank you again for the work you did in that regard, and it will inform all of our efforts for years to come. It's been a little over a year since I started in my position at the division, and I've had the opportunity to talk to many of you in my new capacity. I've talked in detail about the problems that plague your localities, the burdens on your governments, and about our programs. I have been so stirred by your commitment to your communities, and especially by your perseverance, especially given the physical and financial and political challenges you face. So, today we are extraordinarily lucky to have the Secretary of State here because she is fearless in her quest to address these issues that you have identified and is focused on strategically providing state resources to address these great needs. Secretary Rosado is a woman that is more frequently traveling to the far reaches of this state than to her office or home because she personally wants to understand the complexities and uniqueness of the difficulties that surround the issues in your communities. I know firsthand how energetic she is in her service this way, as she's been on the phone with us in the car talking to us about what's going on the road and where the press bots are, I believe. She is adamant that we develop policies and provide the wherewithal to tackle the issues you grapple with in your aging cities, towns, and villages. More importantly, she champions the fight against societal issues, those of poverty, injustice, and inequality that are woven so tightly into the local issues you struggle with. And so I am truly honored to turn the podium over to Secretary Rosado, that is a force for positive and lasting change and makes public service a priority. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here again at this conference. As Ann said, I'm often traveling, mostly driving. The only perk I have is a car that has a hands-free thing, so I'm taking conference calls on the road, except for that stretch between Plattsburgh and Utica where I had no service, but that was pretty scary. I'm usually in touch, and I'm always excited to not just kind of visit all the places in the state. New York is so big. But also to see the way that the work that we're doing at Department of State, as well as throughout, state government, to see it live. And we've just been through the whole series of the SIAT tours with the REDCs in each region. We have 2 more this week. And it's been wonderful to get out there and see, and everyone is very proud of what they've been able to accomplish. So it's really my pleasure. I walked into my New York City office last week, and the receptionist said, "Oh, I thought you only work once a month," because that's how often she sees me. But I am throughout the state, and follow me on Twitter, and just have proof that I am out there bringing messages to all. As Secretary of State, it's my privilege to do that traveling and also to see how government works. The governor is always challenging us to demonstrate how government works to New Yorkers. He tells the story last year after the budget when he was out on one of those rest stops in Long Island, and he was talking about what we had just accomplished in the budget, and this guy in Long Island said, "Yeah, that's nice, but that's never going to happen." And he's like, "No, it's going to happen. We did it. I'm telling you, I'm the governor." He goes, "Yeah, no, that's never going to happen. They'll find some way to not make it happen." And he was really struck by that kind of lack of confidence becomes part of the culture, and we are here to challenge that. I feel fortunate that I'm able to see that stuff at work. I think that when you see Mark Patterson and Thane and everyone in local government, everyone, I want to say most people at DOS, coming, you see that that we really are helping you to find solutions. So we're here today to kind of find more of those solutions and to work collectively to learn from each other. The work you do is hard, and I know that, like my travel, it's not always glamorous, but the impact that you're having in your communities is amazing. And today we hope to amplify those stories. I think one of the most important things, and I've said this to the team, is when we're done with all that infrastructure work and being able to write those grants and all the very technical work, I think one very important thing we have to spend time doing is working on the messaging, is really working on telling those stories. Sometimes that's the most challenging, is not just to tell the stories in your community, but kind of beyond your town, into the regions, and obviously into the state, into the rest of the state. That does three things. It helps us change the narrative, it helps us learn from each other, and it also gives us bragging rights. I want to thank you all for what you do on behalf of Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is truly a champion of making government work, sometimes with a carrot, sometimes with a stick. I'm the carrot person, luckily. As you know, he has emphasized shared services for local governments, and the results that we are seeing make us really proud to be from New York. I always return from my trips more inspired than ever. I am confident that this conference will leave you with that exact feeling of inspiration. You'll return to your homes having learned directly from peers and partners about how public servants across New York continue to successfully tackle complex issues ranging from emergency medical services to water quality to successful consolidations for dissolutions. Some of these success stories were acknowledged last night during our awards ceremony. We had a lot of fun. And for those who couldn't make it, I just want to briefly mention our awardees. The Best Partner Award went to the Development Authority of North Country. We call them DAC. They had another name they told me last time. I couldn't remember. Which has partnered with the Department of State on 13 different projects. It was the first time we awarded that award to a non-governmental entity, and we hope that inspires others out there as well. This year's Trailblazer Award was presented to the town of Fishkill in recognition of their multiple successful partnerships with other municipalities, as well as the development of a shared financial tool for highway projects. The Regional Impact Award went to Chautauqua County for its multiple efficiency and cost-saving projects, including a recently established regional water district. And I think we have the new county chair of Chautauqua. Is he here with us? Borrello, right?
Yes.
I remember faces, not his names. But congratulations to you to continue that important work. The final award, the Secretary's Choice, was earned by Tompkins County, which has set the bar for innovative local solutions that are being replicated by local governments across New York. So let's give a round of applause to all of our winners from last year. Since 2011, the Department of State has allocated more than $89 million towards over 500 projects that increased shared services and enhanced efficiencies. These have resulted in cost savings of over $600 million for New Yorkers. That's my favorite part. That's an applause, yes. In what other role can you give out so much money that's not yours? It's just amazing. Those are numbers that we should all be very proud of. This past year, we saw new cooperation between counties and their municipalities as they partnered on county-wide shared service plans to save property taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars and streamline operations. As well, 6 counties fought for a $20 million winner-take-all prize through the municipal consolidation and efficiency competition that will transform their communities and the way their governments are structured. These counties came to us with proposals that were compelling and thoughtful and are the very definition of innovation. And more importantly, that were put together by a cross-section of people from those communities. These programs show that your efforts as local leaders are incredibly inspiring and are a tremendous benefit to the citizens of New York State. Our conference today builds upon the new lessons from the past. Not only will workshops be interactive and cover many of the successes we highlighted through awards, but we'll be hearing from Tobe, Deputy Secretary for State Operations, about the 2020 census, and later we're going to hear from Natasha Carvajal, who is an assistant to a dear friend of mine, Elizabeth De Leon, who's Deputy Secretary for Labor and Workforce, and she's going to talk about paid family leave, which goes into effect in January 2018, and which is also an amazing accomplishment of this government. While I am certain you will walk away with cool new ideas, I also hope you will share your thoughts with other attendees, as well as with our staff. The nature of our work is collaborative, and we aim to best serve your needs, so we want to hear your ideas for how we can do that better. We want to continue to improve the quality of life for New Yorkers, while also bringing down costs and showing New Yorkers that government can work. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a productive day. I'm going to spend a little time with you this morning, and then I have a keynote at 6 in New York City, so it's really like a 3-hour ride that takes 4 hours, but I'll be back on the road, and I look forward to seeing the summary of your day today. So thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Tobe. I'm Deputy Secretary for State Operations. Secretary of State, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. Tammy, welcome. I'm not sure it's your first time to New York, but certainly welcome to Empire State Capitol and to participate in this session. I've got a little bit of business to cover, and then I want to make a few remarks. First, we're going to offer sort of an add-on to the workshops. At lunch, in this room, we're going to be having sort of an informal get-together for those of you who want to join to talk about the census and paid family leave. It's going to be fairly informal. We have PowerPoints, but what we really want to do is be available to talk to you about whatever questions you have and to perhaps tell you how we see this. And we're going to cover at least the census now very briefly, and then later we can get together if you wish to. So bring your lunch, come on in here, we'll have a talk. We have tables outside. I think it's at least 2 tables staffed by people who can help walk through the census-related issues that we're facing and what the state is offering. There are computers, there's people from our ITS department, and other agencies who can show you the tools that Cornell University has developed to help with the census project and the LUCA process. So feel free to stop at the tables, they're just outside those doors. I'm going to switch just for a second and make some comments about innovation. And this really is, I think, one of the hallmarks of Governor Cuomo's administration. He has been committed to making change, to challenge the status quo, and to find ways in which we can better serve the people of New York State and all of our communities. And as you know, there's been no single area that he's been unafraid to touch. He's willing to go wherever the logic leads and to try and challenge himself and all of us to make change. There's vast changes in state government, from the historic reductions in historic reductions in taxes across the board, all the way through to how state agencies operate and the cap that's been placed upon spending by state agencies. And he's imposed a discipline upon us, but he's also created a climate of innovation and change. And we hope that spirit will infect the entire state, including our local governments. And I'm happy to say, from my start with New York State, working on the Upstate Revitalization Initiative project, through to the work I'm doing now on the census and shared services and other things, we're seeing it. And so in part, the question is, what's innovation? What spawns innovation, and how do people want to do it? And I think it starts with a state of mind, but it's not just that. And it's not just necessity, which perhaps is one of the elements to it. We need to change. It's more than that too. And innovation itself is not just technology. Technology can be a key component of it, and in the economy we tend to focus upon the technology portion of innovation. But innovation is really the willingness to change, and to change for the better, and to take some risks to get there. During the shared services efforts, I was in one of our rural counties, and they were very proud of one of their innovations. Community by canceling the janitorial services, and the 2 employees wiped the desks and took the garbage out every day. And then once a month, somebody came in and did a deep clean that they paid for. That's innovation. It's a form of innovation. It's a form of willingness to change. And with the pressures that we're all under, I think we have to try and do that. But we know that just necessity and a mindset are inadequate to cause innovation to occur. There needs to be other elements, or it will be more common. There's an economist, Paul Romer, about whom I could speak for hours, who has studied this. He first, as a young man, got his doctoral thesis proving that innovation was an undervalued part of economies, and more recently has been thinking about and talking about what causes innovation to occur. And he's touched on the subjects I've mentioned, but he said one of the key elements is an element of freedom, a willingness to make change, and the ability to do so where their restraints are not too bad. During the Shared Services Initiative, what we learned was that in many parts of this state, in many of the communities, New York State was seen as an impediment to innovation. We have rules, we have laws, we have things that you think could change and you could do better. And we've taken that seriously. At the first session that I participated in after, while we were campaigning on behalf of Shared Services, I was asked, well, somebody made a pretty strong statement to that effect. And I said, you know what, we're not afraid to hear that. Rather, we want to hear it. But we want to hear it chapter and verse. We don't want to hear that we ought to get rid of the Taylor law and not have unions. That's sort of a non-starter. But if you can tell us something meaningful that needs to change, that will allow you to do better, tell us. And we got proposals. That there were, first of all, in the shared services initiatives, the counties that participated, there's almost 400 separate actions that the different counties and their municipalities are proposing to take. And we have a large array of the state ought to, things that the state should do. We're committed to trying to do those. Now, we know that there will be obstacles, just as there always have been. But today, in part, is an attempt to flesh out some of the issues that you've identified, the hard ones. Justice courts, where we had, I think it was 22 or 23 counties say they wanted to do something about their courts, and some type of healthcare issues. Normally a healthcare consortium, but it was not a single proposal. And we've got a session on that also, where we're going to try and flesh it out. These are hard things to change, but we know our role in helping you innovate is to face those issues. And we wish to do so. I expect, we can't commit, that there'll be some legislative proposals going into next year's session. We'll see, but we want to address those issues, and we want you to help us. And one of the things we are so committed to is the partnership with local government. So when the census hit us as something we needed to work on, we said, how can we best work with local governments and the state to put together a program to get a full count in New York State? Full, fair count, let's get everybody counted. We don't know what the situation is on the ground within each municipality. We just don't. I was in Little Valley, the county seat of Cattaraugus County, 2 weeks ago, I guess, and met with the county chair of the county legislature, who's their county leader. And she was telling me about an experience 10 years earlier where she was so frustrated with the Census Bureau because she had difficulty in getting them to believe that there were residential units above a bunch of storefronts. And in the end failed. She put it down in Luca, they rejected it, she appealed it, and she failed. And I said, well, maybe we can help at that stage. We can help identify administrative records and perhaps help with the argument. And then I went out and looked in South Dayton, Cattaraugus County, and I could see why it was so hard. It didn't look like there were units up there, but there are. She knew it. There's no way the state would know it. But there are roles the state can and has played and will play. We've done a big technology project through Cornell University with interagency task force that we've put together, in which our goal is to provide the local governments aimed at the county, but not just the counties, the tools to identify the low-hanging fruit on the census. Where can you first go to try and pick up addresses that are otherwise missing? And you can learn more about the tool at our workshop and actually see it at the table. But we run reports that show discrepancies between the number of residences we believe are in a census block from state records, often from you, compared to what the Census Bureau says. And then we rank them highest to lowest, and you can go to the highest block that has more residences, we think, than the Census Bureau does. And you can, on your own, tell the Census Bureau that those residences exist. In one census block, there were over 143 units, residential units in a small census block, more in our records than the Census Bureau had. Low-hanging fruit, easy pick, you don't have to do every census block in your community. But we're trying to make this partnership work, and it is all a new approach. New York State has never done this before with you. Sometimes we've given out money, but we've never really engaged at this really intimate level of being out with you, working with you, having the staff from the Department of State out there. That's our commitment to you, is to do our part and to work with you as you want to do your part. We obviously have the exact same goal, a full count in New York State. In ending, I want to just thank you for what you've done. Obviously, speaking to the choir, you are here because you want to learn about innovation. What I can perhaps say is be brave. Innovation comes from doing something that's a little bit uncomfortable. And we will try and make it so that there are not barriers in place. There's freedom for you to do the innovation as much as we're able to in this very difficult system that we all work in. So thank you and best of luck.
So, in keeping with the theme of innovation today, we have the Public Information Officer, Leigh Tami, from the city of Cincinnati, who's going to talk about the really amazing work they're doing out in our neighboring state, Ohio. So, without further ado, Leigh Tami.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so I am going to start. I have a PowerPoint. It's pretty bare bones, but a lot of what I kind of want you to know is based on our website, so we'll start there. By way of introduction, my name is Leigh Tami. I am the Chief Performance Officer for the City of Cincinnati. I'm also the Director of our Office of Performance and Data Analytics. So our office was launched in May 2015. We're relatively new. Premise for sort of creating us was to use data analytics to deliver services better, to improve response times, to save money, to find efficiencies, and really to make sure that we are making decisions in a data-driven way. So I took on the role of Chief Performance Officer in summer 2016, and probably the first thing that I realized when I took this role on was that despite being the data office, we were not doing a whole lot with our data. I am sure no one can relate to this. I kind of realized we weren't doing a whole lot. We had a lot of work to do. So I wanted to make our data more accessible to people. We had an open data portal that was launched in 2014. Many states have them. I'm sure some of your jurisdictions have them, but I kind of realized as someone who does not have a data background, I'm actually a lawyer by trade, that open data portals are not always the most accessible way to get information. I certainly don't really want to go rooting around on someone's open data portal to find raw data and then make sense of it. It's not a sustainable way to communicate information with the public. So we created Cincy Insights. So Cincy Insights is fully interactive, automatically updating open data dashboard portal. So I wanted to kind of go through it a little bit just to show you what I'm going to be talking about, since that's the point, right? So we have a number of quick links on here. The one that I'm going to refer to is our heroin overdose tracker. I'm going to refer to that throughout the presentation. It's a little bleak. It's definitely a difficult topic, but in the Ohio River Valley, we are pretty much ground zero for the opioid epidemic. So this is something that for us was a really imminent concern, and we realized, oh my gosh, we need to be dealing with this. So this is our overdose tracker. It looks like it's cutting off here just because of the view. But let's see if we're just going to picture this. All right, we'll go with this. So here you can see, at least in part, our heroin overdose response tracker. If you look up Cincy Insights on your mobile phones, it'll also show up on there. It's all mobile friendly. So the way that this works is we track the number of overdoses per neighborhood. We track the number of incidents by month, incidents per day, and then what you can't see is that we have hour of the day, day of the week, and we also have the ultimate outcome. So all of this is interactive and it updates every single day. So if I click on a neighborhood, let's say in this case, East Price Hill, if I hover over it, I can say there have been, in the past 6 months, 112 reported heroin overdoses. So if I click on that, everything else filters against it. So it's a really quick way to see your information. Now I can see what the spread has looked like throughout the months. I can see it, I can search over, I can hover over. Assuming I have an internet connection. I can see the number per day, all of that. I can also search by street. It's a building, you got it. So if I wanted to search, say, for Vine Street, for example, I can do it that way as well. So all of this information, all of our trackers are built this way. They're all fully interactive and they all update at least every day. Our snowplow tracker, when we have a winter weather event, updates every 5 minutes. Our street sweeper updates every 30 minutes. Our trash collection tracker updates every 30 minutes. So I thought this was a good example because it speaks to a real problem, at least for us, and it also shows you the interactivity of this tool. So this is all based on open data, but we just made it sort of more accessible, more user-friendly, out there so anyone can use it. So now I'll go back to my PowerPoint here. So great, so this is the background, Cincy Insights. So the title of the speech is Data is the New Oil. So to be clear, I'm not picking a position on oil or petroleum or the use of oil or anything else. I just think this is a really apt analogy. I think it's one that we can all sort of wrap our heads around, and there are a lot of important parallels to understand. So this is a limited metaphor. I'm not choosing a position. I'm not suggesting that anyone else choose a position. I just like using this. So the first way that data is like oil is that it's a valuable resource. Oil is valuable to us because it powers our lifestyles. It powers our vehicles, it powers our machinery. It enables us to live lives that we want. It enables us to have mobility. It keeps, we create plastic, it keeps our medical and technology industries going. So oil is a powerful resource. Data is also a really powerful, really valuable resource. If anyone used Google Maps to get here, you were using data, which, to tell you the quickest way to get here, to tell you what traffic issues you were going to run into. If you use Yelp, whenever you're going out to eat, you're using data. You're looking at what other people thought of different restaurants. You're taking that into consideration as you make a decision, right? So data is a valuable resource. It tells us what we need to know about the world around us, and it makes decision-making, travel, and a lot of other components of our lifestyles much, much easier. So the second way the data is like oil is that data can be hard to see at the surface level. So this is something that I think is particularly true in government. A lot of governments or organizations will ask me what data we had to start collecting to create a lot of our dashboards. The answer is none. We had it all. It was all already there, and you probably also have it as well. But you don't necessarily know because it's covered by the operation. So probably the best example of this is like police and fire departments, right? So police and fire departments do what? Well, they save lives, they put out fires, they respond to 911 calls, they make sure that someone is on the scene when there's an emergency. So on the surface, that's what police and fire do. Underneath the surface, in order to make sure that police officers and firefighters are dispatched correctly, you have an entire database that is ensuring that it's putting down when they're going out, where they're going, who's going, to what address, what happened. It's everything that you need to know to make sure that you're getting them on the scene as you need to, right? So data is hard to see at surface level, it's valuable. Data isn't very useful in its raw form. So this is really why we created Cincy Insights. I don't really, maybe this is just me, I don't know. I don't think that looking at sort of a raw spreadsheet is super insightful. It certainly doesn't read easily to the layperson, it's difficult. So oil is the same way. For the most part, when we have oil, we have to refine it. We might need to refine it crudely, we might need to do more refining, but we have to process it before it's something that we can use. So for data, it's exactly the same thing. What we get is something that's unrefined. Sometimes we need to enrich it. Sometimes we need to add things to it. Sometimes we need to clean it up, to make sure we're spelling something like Vine Street the same way in all of our data sets. That's what we have to do to make sure that we can actually use it. So data isn't useful in its raw form, and data isn't so valuable in and of itself. So this is sort of, there might be some contention around this, but in a vacuum, data is not, we don't want data because data can do something for us as it sits in front of us. We want data because we use it as a tool in our lives. So oil is the same way. Not very many people can do a whole lot with a vat of oil or crude oil, petroleum, sort of sitting in front of them. Maybe for some people you can, that's fine, but for the most part, we don't value oil because we like oil itself. We value oil because we know what it does, because we know what it powers, because we like the idea of the lifestyle, the quality of life that it creates for us. Data is the same way. Data is a way to get information, and information is a way to get insight. What we really want is the insight, right? We don't even necessarily want the information. It's helpful. It's helpful to know where things are happening and what they're doing, but if we don't know why it's relevant, then it doesn't matter. So data is a way to get at information. Information is a way to get at insight. That's what makes data valuable. So there you go. That's how data is like oil, in my opinion. So there you go. So how do we tap this resource, right? Local governments collect more data than they realize, but it's largely untapped. How do we tap this resource? So I think there's really 4 key steps, and this is what guided our process for developing Cincy Insights. The first is start with a real problem, a real use case. Don't have something theoretical. Start with a real problem. Dig in and figure out what you already have. Extract, refine, and process what you have, and then ensure sustainability. Make sure that you can do the same thing over and over again. So the first component of this is start with a real problem. This is your use case. So there's a lot of reasons that, in my opinion, we should do it this way. The first is that data can be really overwhelming if you don't have a direction. If you don't know where you're going or what you're trying to know or what you're trying to learn, you're going to jump in and find all kinds of stuff. It's going to derail you, and it's going to make it really difficult to set a track forward. So building something with data can be hard and tedious if you're not thinking about sort of what your end game is, right? The second is when you have a real problem, you're going to get buy-in. So one of the big issues that local governments, state governments, federal governments, organizations around the country have is that everyone thinks their data is like proprietary. This is my silo of data, I'm this agency, this is my silo of data, this is my silo of data. If you are really solving a real problem, if you're going after a real problem, data sharing is going to become less of an issue, because opposing data sharing is sort of non-collaborative that goes in the face of solving this problem. So if that's something you're running up against, this is a really great way to increase buy-in from agencies and also from high level. The other, I guess the third thing with this is that the juice really isn't worth the squeeze if you don't know why the outcome's important. So if you can see where all of your potholes are in a city, that's fine, that's great. That might even tell you something about where things are happening, but if it's not actionable for you, if you don't know when they happened, if you can only see all of them over 5 years, well, okay, so what? What are you gonna do? But if you go into it saying, okay, we know we have this pothole issue, we know that we are getting sued, for example, by a lot of residents because they're busting their tires on potholes, we need to see where these things are happening and then start looking at when they're happening, how they're happening, etc. So the other part of this is once you can do it for one area, you can scale it up. So the example, again, that I refer back to is with our heroin overdose response tracker. So the whole reason that this site even exists, in I think July 2016, the city of Cincinnati had a really major spike in heroin use because it wasn't really heroin use, it was heroin overdoses, because we started getting heroin that was laced with carfentanil. So I'm sure now this is all sort of, within public discourse. At this point it wasn't. If you don't know, carfentanil is essentially like elephant tranquilizer. It's really toxic, and the overdose rate is outrageous just because it's so much more powerful. So I was actually in Chicago. I was at a conference with my chief data officer, who's in my office, and some of our EMS fire chiefs. And I started getting all these, I'm on this panel talking about like EMS dispatch and machine learning or something like totally stupid. And I'm on this, right, like totally irrelevant because this is all happening. And I start getting calls and texts, and people are saying, oh my God, we had 76 overdoses in 24 hours. This is really wild. And so the EMS chiefs are sitting there like, oh my God, we're gonna have burnout with our paramedics. What stations are those? We need to get roving medics in. They kind of jumped into operations mode. And I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I don't really know anything about this epidemic other than that I know it's happening. I don't know where this is happening. I don't know when this is happening. I don't know what units are responding. I don't know what hour of the day. I don't know if there's trends. I don't know if it's near highways. I don't know if it's near homes. I don't know if there's neighborhoods that are getting, I don't know anything about this. I'm the data person. I don't know anything about this. So that was rough. That was kind of a realization for me. We don't kind of collectively know as an organization anything other than these high-level numbers. So I called one of my then analysts, and I said, look, we need to start mapping this. We need to start mapping this. I want to see at least where this is happening. So we started mapping it. Then we started looking at the time. Then we started looking at day of the week, at month, and all of a sudden we started noticing trends. We started seeing when things were happening. That enabled us not only to make sure we knew where to put medics and when to put them out, but it also told us these are areas where we're seeing this happen. Is it because they're by the highway? Is it something that police knows? Are we appropriately dispatching overtime? So it really kind of helped us not just inform the public, but also make operational decisions, which ended up being really helpful because in September 2016, which is the highest month we've had since we started looking at this in July 2016, we had 493 overdoses. That is around 17 a day, which is one every hour and a half. That is a lot of overdoses. And that's only the ones that got called into 911, reported, went out. So for us, this was a really critical tool. It helped us think through how are we going to get our medics out, how are we going to get them on the streets, and this is a real problem we're solving. We ran into far less opposition because, my God, this is something everyone understands. Everyone understands why this is important, why it's an issue. and that we need to attack this as a use case. So start with the real problem is my first piece of advice. So the second, excuse me, is to dig in and figure out what you already have. It is quite a bit more than you realize. So I think I mentioned this, but whenever I talk to governments, organizations, cities, counties, states, everyone asks, well, what data did you start collecting to get all this information? How did you collect it, or did you get it, or where did you go find it? Like, we already have it, and you also already have it. I think the biggest mistake the governments make, particularly local governments, is thinking that they have to go get data, that that's the starting point. You don't have to go get data. You have to think about what you have, and then you have to think about how you want to use it. So I have sort of 3 examples for this that are things that pretty much all local governments have, either at a city, county, or sometimes at a state level, that'll just sort of show you, if you have this, then you can build this. So the first is, if you have a police and fire department, which I'm assuming pretty much everyone in here does, if you have a police and fire department, congratulations, you have CAD. So CAD is computer-aided dispatch. It's not the same database everywhere, but it is the same premise, which is you have a system that makes sure that your firefighters and your cops are on scene when they need to be, where they need to be, and prepared to deal with whatever is there. So that system is designed to make sure that you are optimizing your resources, that you're getting first responders on scene, and that they're able to kind of administer care. So if you have a police or fire department, you have CAD, that means you can create these 3 things. So there are 3 of our dashboards that people don't always realize are built with computer-aided dispatch data. Our heroin overdose response tracker, CAD data. Police calls for service, CAD data. Fire and rescue incident dashboard, CAD data. This is data everyone has. We did not go out and survey, heroin overdoses, or we didn't go out and try to follow any of our needle exchanges, anything like that. We have all this data. You know what your first responders are responding to. In fact, they're already using a lot of this data for other things. They're using it to report federally. Some of them are using it to report to the state, because that's how they get funding. So not only do you already have this data, but it's already processed a little bit. Somebody has already been looking at it. There are some canned reports on it. So really what you need to do next is take a deeper dive and figure out, how do I get what I need out of this data? So my next example is fleet. If you have fleet, so you have police cars, trash trucks, dump trucks, if you bought them within the last 5 to 10 years, I'm almost positive you have GPS on them. So that means you have an asset tracking or monitoring system, which is producing data, because that's what it's designed to do. If you have a system that's producing data, that means you can create a snowplow tracker, you can create a trash truck collection tracker, and you can create a street sweeper tracker. We have all 3. All we did was look at the GPS data. You have it, you pull it in, you make it usable. It's all there. You already have this information. You don't have to go find it. The third is if you have 311 or customer service requests. So we actually don't have 311 in Cincinnati, which is weird, but we don't. We have a customer service request system. So any customer service request, like there's a pothole, this road needs repaved, there's blight in my neighbor's yard, my neighbor didn't put their trash out, or the trash is left out, or somebody put a couch in the middle of the street, whatever. It all goes into this work order system. And every city, those are things that don't live in someone's head, right? There's a work order system primarily because these things get passed to different people. So there are things that live in people's head. Somebody might know this is what the process behind it means, or this is what this code means, or this is what close really means, and this is what this timestamp means. But there's documentation of these work orders. In some cities, it's partially paper. It might be like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's there. There's something there. So what does that mean? Well, that means you can track potholes, because you probably have an idea of where they are, when they're getting opened, and when they're getting closed, because those are all things you have to know to complete a work order, right? You can also show your open customer service requests. So if you know that you have things open, somebody has to complete them. You have that record, it's there. That's on someone's plate to complete. So all you have to do is go get that data and make it accessible. So again, to reemphasize, you already have what you need. You have probably more than what you need. You don't have to go find it. You don't have to go reinvent the wheel. There's no need to do that. You just have to think through how you want to use it and how you want to tap into it. So that's the third, my third point is you have to extract, refine, and process your data to sort of make it usable, right? So this is definitely the difficult part. This is the heavy lift, but this does not have to be expensive. We were able to build the entire infrastructure behind Cincy Insights, which is this. We were able to build this in about 6 months with 2 or 3 people for $55,000. That's it. I don't have a big budget. I have one IT person, but we built this. We've been continuously refining it. Obviously, it's a work in progress, but we were able to not only build this, we were able to automate this. So this, you can do it. You can do this with not that much money. So what do you have to do? How do you do that? The first is you don't need to invest a lot, but you do need someone, at least one person, whose full-time job it is to only look at this. You need someone to come in and only look at data. Go dig through your data, go build relationships with your departments, go talk to people, go figure out what systems you have, how they work, if anyone has looked at them, if no one has looked at them, if they're even being used. You have to start there. It's an investment, but it definitely pays off. If you were sitting, speaking of oil, if you were sitting on oil, you would not sort of say, well, okay, we're sitting on this oil, this is great, like, we're gonna tap it occasionally, and like, we'll get some benefit. You would say, you would build an infrastructure around it. You would say, I need a team, I need people to come and tap this and refine it and use it for me. The same is true for your data, this untapped asset, this resource. So, again, we had a team of 2 or 3 people, $55,000, and we had to think of really creative ways to kind of do this. I'd say the other part of this, and I wasn't going to tell this story, but I told it last night, and someone said, oh, that's great, you should tell it. So I will tell it, is that because we're so small, we rely on automation a lot. So all these processes are automated. The pull from the source systems inside of our network and the processing is automated. It pulls into our central data warehouse and then pushes to a view, automated. Pushes to our pre-made, our models, what I just showed you with our heroin tracker, the push to that, automated. Publishing that out, automated. So, at least for me, I thought that the hardest part of automation would probably be getting all this stuff from the source systems, from these departments, these databases are all over the place, oh my god, getting them to the warehouse. That wasn't the hardest part. So we're getting ready to publish all this information out, to publish our dashboards, and my chief data officer comes to me and says, Leigh, I have some really bad news. I'm like, oh, I haven't slept in like 2 weeks. Oh my god, like, what's going on? So he goes, well, to publish these dashboards, it's not sort of as simple as I thought it would be to automatically do them. We, the company that we use Tableau, to publish these dashboards, wants us to buy an external server, and that's how we do this. That's the tool that we need to publish these. I said, okay, so like, what's the issue? Well, the external server is $500,000. So I'm in my office like, I don't want to pay for this. I'm kind of going ballistic. So I sit and I think, and then I walk back to his office and I said, my chief data officer's name is Brandon. I said, Brandon, I want you to find a way to trick the computer into thinking somebody is sitting there clicking a button every 5 minutes, because that's really all updating is, right? Automated's clicking it every 5 minutes. So that's why we value automation, because it does that for us. It automates whatever the process is, whether it's pulling data, publishing data, whatever. So a couple weeks later, I'm happy to tell you that to this day, our automation process for our dashboards is run by a piece of $40 software called Push the Freaking Button, PTFB. It was created by 2 guys in Scotland, and essentially, it literally tricks your computer into thinking that someone is clicking a button, and that's how we automate publication of our dashboard. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do, like, it's awesome. So there are all kinds of things you can do to duct tape stuff together so that you can make this work on a budget. A lot of people will talk about going open source. I think open source is great, but the problem is you need someone to maintain it. You need someone who's constantly looking at it, constantly maintaining it, and you pay for your data storage. We use a lot of pre-made softwares or tools, and we sort of piece them together, and that's how we were able to scale quickly and easily on a budget. So this is an example of some of the kinds of data that we process, just sort of for some context. We look at GPS data, we look at economic development data, we look at recycling data, police data, survey data, medical emergency services, all kinds of data. We look at all kinds of data, and this process works for all of them. So again, extract it, refine it, make it useful. So I'd say the last step, the fourth area is ensuring sustainability, making sure you can keep using your resource. So I think I kind of touched on this, but if you have an entire resource you're sitting on, an entire reservoir of oil, or in this case data, using it once is not sufficient, it's not valuable if you use it once. You're not going to sustain a market for it because you used it once. The same is true of data. Data is less valuable. As soon as you sort of capture it, it becomes increasingly less valuable because it's increasingly less fresh, right? We're all kind of looking for real-time data. We want enriched data. We want to make sure that what we know is like the most recent information. So if we're going to be producing that, that means we have to build an entire infrastructure, an entire system to make sure that we're constantly pushing out this resource. That's the only way that we can make sure it retains its value. So I'm going to return back to this because this is pretty much, it's the same thing, but there's really two ways, in my opinion, to do this on a budget. The first is think through centralizing your data. So unlike a lot of larger cities that have various data warehouses, which is really just a way of saying a big area where you collect all of this data that you clean and curate and pick from other sources, we have one. That's made it really easy to manage. It's made it really easy to track, to know what we have, where it is, and to control how often we publish it. So data centralization is the first step of that. The second is automation. I think, as I alluded to, every step of this is automated, sort of for two reasons. The first is I have one IT guy, and he's my chief data officer. So I want to free him up to do other things. I can't have someone, in our back office making sure that we're doing something like pulling police data every time the same way. That needs to be a standardized process so that I can make sure that I get the same quality of data every time, and also, to make sure that I don't have to watch this. The second is that in order for any data initiative to be sustainable, it cannot be personality driven. It can't. It can't be driven by my personality, it cannot be driven by your personality, it cannot be driven by an executive's personality, it has to run by itself. So if I were to drop off the face of the earth tomorrow, which I don't plan on, but if I were, this would run by itself. It's set up to run by itself. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be tweaked, that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be modified or monitored, but it does mean that it runs on its own. It doesn't require someone watching it, babysitting it, hitting a button every time, sort of hoarding this institutional knowledge about how and why it works to make sure that it's happening. That also frees me up and frees my staff up to really not just make sure that our data flow is working, then we're able to step back and say, well, we know it's working, we know that we have what we need, now we can do analysis on it. So once you build an infrastructure that supports pushing all this data to one place, to cleaning it, to processing it, then you're really able to do analysis. You're really able to do meaningful stuff with your data, which I think is the point. I mean, that's what I'm here for. I don't know I can't speak for anyone else. So, again, for this, using the example of the heroin tracker, because it's a specific example, every day we have people that use this, that look at this for information. Our health department checks it every single morning to see when there's going to be spikes. In fact, because we reported a few spikes a few days ago, we've just regionally issued a health emergency. So that tells our first responders, as well as our hospitals, that we've seen an increase in overdoses. We're probably going to see an increase in carfentanil use, or we're probably going to see different batches coming through. So we need to be aware of things like exposure with dirty needles. We need to be staffed up in our emergency rooms. Basically, we need to be kind of acting as if we're in crisis mode for this, right? But that's because we started seeing this increase in responses. Our health department uses it. We also have a number of nonprofits that use it because it tells them where they need to go to do targeted outreach or Narcan training. So now in Cincinnati, a lot of civilians, including most government employees, have Narcan on hand, just because this is such a huge issue. So the way that this organization is able to target Narcan use or Narcan training is going to these neighborhoods where they're seeing a ton of overdoses happening and saying, okay, we should probably go here, this is where we're seeing a frequency. Obviously it's not perfect, we're not claiming to capture all heroin use, but this is a good proxy for where this is happening, right? So why is any of this important? Why does any of this matter? This is sort of my final point. And then we'll go into questions because I'm sure you don't want to hear me talk for an hour. I don't want to hear me talk for an hour. This is important because this is people's information, right? We can't say that we are making an effort to be innovative and transparent and open with our data if people don't know how to use it. So if my 95-year-old grandmother cannot get onto a browser and figure out what's happening on her street with crime or heroin or whatever, it's not open data, it's not usable, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I sort of theoretically put it out there and everyone's looking at it and like, good for them. Everyone's not looking at it, so it's not truly open data. Additionally, this is 2017, right? So if you go on Google Maps, I expect that I can figure out the fastest way to get somewhere, that I can figure out the nearest chicken place within half a mile, and I can see how it's rated, and I know the hours, and I can look at the menu. I can probably make a reservation, and then I can route myself there. That's sort of the expectation that the people have for good, for better, for worse, good, bad, neutral. That's where we are. So as governments, as local governments particularly, I think we really have to kind of come to terms with that. Does that mean we need to be Google? No, we really shouldn't try to be Google. Let's let Google be Google. It does mean that we need to kind of stay in our government lane and think about how do we make information that we have accessible and understandable to more people. So I think, in this day and age, and this is kind of how I conclude whenever I talk about this, local government is in a really unique position. We capture more data, we do more things, we have more interface with citizens than like pretty much anyone else does. We fill their potholes, we pick up their trash, we respond to their 911 calls, we pave their roads, we maintain their parks. We do a lot of stuff, which means we have a lot of data. We're sitting on a lot of information. So it's really incumbent upon us as local governments to think about how can we be good stewards, not just of these resources, but of this information that we have about these resources. How can we be really good stewards of this data that we have and that we ultimately are sort of using and guarding and processing on behalf of the public. So that's pretty much what I have. I think we're opening it up to questions, comments, concerns. Yeah.
Hi, Tom Humbach, County Rockland. Was there any opposition, either political or from time to time law enforcement can be very guarded about the information that they have towards making this kind of information public in a very transparent way?
There definitely was. So I'd say there are two big ways that, two big appeals of public-facing data that, particularly with law enforcement, they're really excited about. The first is if you push your data to something like an open data portal, you significantly cut down on your FOIA requests. So you don't have your public information officer sitting there like, recreating data sets, or in some cases pushing out like unredacted data, etc. It has a lot of pragmatic value. Having this data means that you have clean data, means that people can look and find the same thing every single time. And for them, it means that they can do something aside from aggregate law enforcement data. I'd say the second part, or the second way to make sure that you're able to do this is, while being collaborative, having buy-in from the top. So I really was able to do this because I knew that if any of my data connection was cut off, that I could make a phone call and it would be switched back on. So that's important. That's really important because if you don't have someone who's making decisions saying this is how this needs to go, if you don't have that executive buy-in, it's going to be you can do this in parts, but it's going to be harder to push through when you hit that resistance.
Good morning. Phil Wade, Mayor of the Village of Bainbridge. Excellent job, Leigh. Do you track any statistics about how the data is being used? In other words, on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, any trends in that direction?
We do. So we know how many hits our site is getting. We're seeing increased mobile use. So one of the first things we noticed when we have at the bottom of each page, we have a feedback form. So people can type in and say, this was helpful, or like, this was garbage, but we know what they think, which is important, especially when they think it's garbage. So a lot of the feedback that we were getting initially, sort of to your point, was this isn't mobile friendly. And we looked on the sort of back end of our site and we realized, like, oh my God, more than half the people using this are using mobile phones. So now, again, if you go on your phone, anyone can go on, all of our dashboards are built to be mobile friendly. In fact, unfortunately, only the projector view is one of the limitations of the way that our archaic website is sort of the way that it's built. But we do watch a lot of trends. We also see when people are starting to look at things like the heroin overdose tracker, when people start looking at like our shootings dashboard, it's usually around either like, there was a media story or there was an event or something like that. So we do kind of see how people are tracking that and using that, and also what's happening in parallel.
Hi, Leigh. That was a great presentation. Thank you. So I'm from the Center for Technology and Government at UAlbany, and we just held a workshop with about 8 cities talking about IoT data. And one of the questions that emerged several times was asking about the types of people that you have in your department, because not every local government is able to hire a person who has a data background. So they're trying to parse out what are the responsibilities and what are the skills and capabilities that I need in order to do something like that. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. So I think I mentioned this. I do not have a data background. I went to law school. I actually marred in the great state of New York, which is sort of random. I probably should have opened with that. Whoops. So I don't have a background in data or technology. I have an undergraduate degree in theology, and then I have a Juris Doctorate. So I did not come into this knowing anything about data. In fact, when I entered as an analyst, I could kind of use Excel, but I could dig around for information. I could build relationships, and I understood conditions and categories. So that's sort of the premise of analytical thinking. You have if this, then this, or whatever, and you have this thing is in this category. Those are the kinds of people you need to hire, because to be frank with you, the rest of it is more or less fungible, okay? Teaching, if you're really determined, you can teach yourself. You can go on Google and in a weekend teach yourself how to use Tableau or how to, write some code. There's a lot of, you don't have to be super technical. You don't need to hire a data scientist. In fact, I would discourage that. I don't think that's really the starting point. I think the starting point is working with the IT that you have, because chances are they're doing some amount of either working with your vendors who host your data, or they're your database administrators. So start by working with them, asking them what what it looks like, what you have, how it's going, and then get, someone like in my position, which, who's sort of in charge of this is how we're going to use it and how we're going to aggregate it and what it's going to look like. And then get analysts who will build relationships with departments and get nosy and ask nosy questions. Most of what we figured out was not because we were data scientists, it's because we were curious and determined, and I didn't want to pay $500,000 for automation. I mean, it's things like that. That's the personality, that's sort of the way of thinking that you need. So I think it's a mistake to think, oh, I need to get someone with like a math and science background. You can, but I mean, we're all government, we can't compete with like, these big tech companies. We can't. We kind of shouldn't try. So instead, let's get people who are motivated, creative, who are committed to public service, who are able to kind of do this work. The other thing I will say about that is that if you want people that can do this work, you need to think about making sure that you can funnel them in like every 2 years. That's not a popular view. People like someone who's going to sit and stay for a while, and I get it. I have people come in my office, leverage the position for a year, and then leave. But this kind of work is really intense, and you get really burned out. So if you really want to make this sustainable, make sure you have interns and make sure you have a way of getting people, recruiting them, allowing them to pass through more quickly. Not super popular. I understand the government hiring is a nightmare. I am in the process of doing it now. I am doing it almost constantly, actually, just because of how it works. But that's how you make sure that you are constantly pushing something like this forward.
Mitch Lewis from the Maxwell School. We're curious too. I'm wondering if you've been able to use all of this data for making budgetary decisions.
We have. So we actually, if you Google Cincinnati Office of Performance and Data Analytics, you can see our cumulative impact. I write a memo every year, sort of explaining where we see tangible savings. So as of the last 2 years, we saved like $6.2 million conservatively. So those are things that we can absolutely objectively quantify. That's not looking at things like employee time for FOIA requests or the benefits of monitoring something like oversight. So we absolutely have been able to use this not just to kind of save money, but also to see this is probably where we're going to have a need for an increase. A great example of this is with public safety staffing. So because fire and police classes come in as classes, that means they more or less retire as classes, which means that you suddenly have this drop off of like 50 people. So what does that mean? Well, it means either you're going to spend on overtime or you need to prepare and have another recruit class. So that kind of lets us think through how are we going to budget overtime, how are we going to make sure that our recruit classes are coming in at the right time, what are the funds we need to sort of allocate accordingly. There are a lot of other examples, that's the first one that came to mind.
Can I get a question? My question is there something you wish you could measure that you can't?
Is there something I wish I could measure that I can't? So I think right now there's two answers I have to that question. The first is I wish that I felt like there was a reliable way to get honest citizen feedback. I am of the belief that surveys are super limited. I'm not a big survey person, even though they're all over, we use them a lot. It's sort of this voluntary response, right? So you're only getting responses from people who feel strongly one way or another. I wish there was really a way to sort of engage people to get like a user experience, not just for dealing with data, but for quality of life. Really, most of the constructive feedback that we've gotten for this initiative has been talking to people who are trying to use it, and they say like, it doesn't work on my phone, or I don't know what this means, or this is not clear, this is jargony. So I think I wish that I could get more like organic, honest citizen feedback. I think the second is I think a lot of local governments could really benefit from engaging technology like air quality sensors or like water control. We have some of those, but we don't have a lot of them. And I think that those are things that if deployed correctly, if that data was used correctly, we could really start doing some cool things with that information. One example where this is kind of happening is in Louisville, Kentucky. They're using air quality data and they're hooking it up to like the Internet of Things. So they're hooking it up to smart devices. So one potential use case for this is, if you have a lot of neighborhoods where you know that something is, that air quality is an issue and there are old buildings or, it's like low-income housing, what you do is you retrofit them with like a smart filter. So essentially, if the air quality goes down significantly or, changes, then this air filter automatically turns on. It's a really easy way to kind of improve quality of life for people. I personally think that is the future of smart cities, but we have to invest in the infrastructure to collect that information.
Good morning, thanks for sharing your story here. It sounds like you've been on quite a journey. Is there just a single lesson learned that you could share, or something that you would do differently if you were just starting on this path today?
Yeah, I think probably the most valuable lesson learned that I took from this is, although it's really hard to do, move as quickly as you can before anyone realizes what you're doing. That's sort of how we were able to do this. We built this entire infrastructure that you're looking at with 2 or 3 people in 6 months for $55,000. That was like a lot of work. But in an ideal world, I would stretch that over like 2 years and like triple the budget at least. But if you want to do this well, you have to do it quickly. I would say avoid the trap of the 2 to 3 year strategic planning. That has value. That has value add, significant value add for things like budget and other things in government. But what made this innovative was that we were able to prove the concept quickly. I think the sooner you can show the value of what you're doing, the more buy-in you get. It'll make the rest of it much easier.
So kind of to your point that you just made, Are you the first chief performance officer in the city of Cincinnati, or did the department exist before you? Like, how did this come about in Cincinnati?
Sure. So I'm actually the second chief performance officer. The first was recruited from Baltimore. He was running the city SAC program there, and he was really focused on, he had a lot of skills, but his focus was like performance management. So the initial scope of this office was to manage performance, and I think there's a place for that. I think that's important, but it stagnates really quickly because you talk about KPIs and sort of by the time you go get them and find them, like, you don't even know if that's necessarily what you're looking at, or you only know what's happening on a high level. You don't sort of know what's underneath that. So he actually ended up not staying in the position for very long, and I assumed it probably like 9 or 10 months into the office's inception. But I was there to help build it. So really, the reason that this all got sort of up and running was that I realized that we had a lot of resources, we had access to a lot of data, but we hadn't done anything with it. We purchased an enterprise data warehouse, which was not that expensive. I had a chief data officer who really had been kind of like trying to figure out what his role meant. And he and I talked about it, particularly after this heroin overdose incident, and realized like we really can build something, and we really can make something, and then we can make it public facing, and then it can refresh, and it can be interactive. And that's sort of that was the journey that this took. It was really coming to a situation where I wanted to know more about what was happening where I lived, and I wanted to be able to search it by street, and I wanted to be able to know by month and by hour, and I wanted to be able to hover over it and see what was going on, and I couldn't, and I had no way of doing that. That's what really kind of drove the development of this infrastructure.
And just one other thing. So do you see this sparking interactivity between your departments now, and even with organizations outside of the government?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. I think organizations outside check these all the time to see where things are happening, how they're going. News stations are really into it, so they use it all the time. But I think that what this has also helped with is, look, the process of getting all this data to this point means that aside from having this dashboard, you also have all this data that now is clean and it's uniform and it's accessible. And that means that your departments can use it for other things too. So we have our snowplow tracker, which just to the public shows this is where the snowplows have been. Well, on the back end is an almost identical one, but it's like by crew and by schedule. So our public service department is, loves it. I mean, they'll call someone and be like, I see you're at Wendy's, like, what are you doing? I mean, really, this happens all the time. Or, they'll see, I see that you put your broom down here, that's not a street. I mean, and it's, initially there was some pushback on that, but then we all kind of realized, the flip side of that is then, we have citizens calling saying, you didn't plow my street. We can get on there and say, oh, yes, we did. 5 times starting at 5 o'clock this morning. It just snowed 3 feet. Sorry. So I think it's, this has happened. We all know. So I think that's sort of how we've gotten a lot of use. And again, we've had, a lot of, particularly with the heroin overdose one or some of the police ones, we have a lot of, outside public nonprofits that use them all the time that check them to see where they're going to target their resources and that kind of thing.
I see that you've done this with vehicles, you've done it with the opioid. Have you done it with other things like measuring blight or economic development issues? And can you make it granular enough that you can determine cause and effect? So, for example, indicators of blight might see trends, the neighborhoods becoming more blighted, leading to other problems.
We have. So I'm actually going on here. The way that this is organized is by priority goals, which is sort of within the framework of our city manager's strategic plan. So when you go onto any of these pages, and it's taking a minute to load because, this is the first thing you see, excuse me, this is called results Cincy. So this is just really high level numbers because sometimes all you want to do is search by neighborhood and see how many green spaces have been cleaned, how many customer service requests have been answered. Here we have our private lot abatement, we have the miles that we've split by street, so we have a lot of that information. Really for us, honestly, and then down here we have economic incentives, so we map incentives by neighborhood, amount, and type, community councils, private lot abatement, green space maintenance. I'll just click on that one for fun. We have a lot of this information that we're collecting, but I think really the first step on our end is before we start trying to determine causation is looking at correlation and making sure we even understand what we have. So we have all this blight data, but we don't necessarily have like clean property data, right? So we don't have, our parcel data is like a mishmash. So we might, when we're looking at, excuse me, like something like blight or vacant lots, the first thing we look for is like, who owns this lot? Is it an LLC? Is it a person? When was it purchased? Is there tax delinquency? But when you start digging into that data, like, it's not super clean. So the goal is to clean as much of this as we can and then kind of say, okay, we're all starting from this place of usable data. Now we can start talking about sort of, more in-depth causation, correlation, et cetera.
Besides the $40 quick click the button software, what would you say are the biggest cost drivers for something like this, even with the low budget, and also to the extent that a local government needs more security for more personal data, would that increase the cost?
So those are great questions. I think the first thing is like a lot of local governments. The first thing is it depends on where your data lives now. So if you have data that's cloud-based or with a vendor, the way that you're pulling that in, you're gonna have to think more about, security, where all this information lives, how you're getting it, and what you're doing with it. The way that our data warehouse is set up now, we have two different like actual data warehouses. One is for internal use, and one is with curated data sets that we have pushed through our rigorous process of cleaning, redacting, anonymizing. They've gone to the law department, they've gone to the subject matter experts, we've seen them, and that sort of sits like externally. So anytime that anything has to authenticate, it authenticates against the public data, the public facing one. So we're making sure that we have those, we're keeping those really separate. For us, security has been less of an issue primarily because a lot of our databases are within our network, which is true for a lot of local governments, not all. If it's not, you're gonna have an increased security risk, but for us, that's been primarily true. As far as cost drivers, excuse me. I'd say the licenses that we have for our visualization software, Tableau, are steep. They're not, it's not unmanageable, but that's an expensive thing. You have to contract for some of your services, like your database maintenance. If you're hosting a website, you have to pay for that. It's a lot of the sort of the tools like that. But I'd say if you have the right people and they're thinking about how can we sort of duct tape this together, you're thinking in a way like how can I deconstruct this, you're going to find cost savings.
So, Kyle Wilbur, Division of Local Government, do you have any examples that you can share outside of Cincinnati? We have a lot of small local governments that, like, I'm like you, I think it's cool, I think we should do this stuff, and it should be simple, but it's not, because it's scary, I guess, because you have all this data, what do I start with? What could a small local government do to start? Would it be highway, would it be, I don't know.
Pick a problem. Pick a problem. So this really started when we first launched this. We had 50. We now have almost 50 dashboards. We had 15 when we first started. That was because we just do a lot of stuff. You can do this with any. I would say start with that's why the first step, is start with an issue. Start with a use case. For us, heroin was a really obvious one. Shootings and crime data is another one for some cities. I know. I talked to the chief data officer in Syracuse. Blight is an issue there. Vacant lots are an issue there. Start with one thing you want to focus on and don't get distracted. I think that's the way that this becomes something that's sustainable. It sounds really fun and really good to make like this whole slew of dashboards, and it's great, and it's something I'm glad that we've had the capacity to do. But I think having one really functional, really informative product is better than having 10 that are like so-so. It just, or that update every so often. So I'd say start with one thing, focus on that one thing, get it all the way there, and then think about how you can scale it. Okay.
Ari Epstein, Department of State. Do you use any data from other sources to produce these visualizations, like state open data or federal open data? And what's your process for bringing that in?
So a lot of we use a lot of that data is spatial data. So we use things like neighborhoods, census tract, census block level. You know, we use the FEMA data a lot because as we're seeing increased flooding. So we do pull in a lot of that data. There's the way that we sort of join that with the data we have now, we spatially join it, which is, you don't need to know what that, you force them together, you put them on top of each other. It's not crazy, and it's not ultra expensive because most cities or most municipalities or most counties have some kind of geographic information systems department. So for us, that's the primary way that we found to sort of combine those data sources. Other than that, my focus has been primarily on, we use them primarily to enrich the data that we already have. So it's like if I have an address or I have a parcel and I want to know the census tract and the block level, and I want to know if it's on the floodplain and what FEMA quadrant it's in and the fire district and what kinds of other resources is it in the landslide area. Those are the kinds of things that we use a lot of that data for. But in terms of like building it into our analysis, our primary focus has been figuring out what we have and then seeing what we can bring on top of that.
So one last thing from me. So can you speak a little bit about the acceptance and support of local government officials electeds? You know, how it's viewed by your council or your mayor or city manager?
Yeah, I think that honestly, primarily the way that we've gotten this out the door is getting people to think it's their idea, which like is fine with me. It doesn't have to be my idea. I don't care. But if you want this to get done, everyone needs to feel like they thought of part of it. So most council members, most mayors, most city managers want to be transparent. They want to provide customer service. They want to be that public official who is making this easy or accessible or, you know, oh my gosh, working with government is not as tedious as it has to be. Everyone wants that. I want that. I mean, as a citizen and as a government official. So if you're able to sort of proof of concept this and say, look, this is the capability that we're working toward. This is what we're doing. We're doing it with this one small part, but we can do it with all these other things. It's much easier to get buy-in that way. And if you say, look, this really speaks to this priority that you have or this idea that you have, you know, that's how you get it out the door. I was really fortunate in that our current city manager, Harry Black, really supported this initiative. He created the office. He made sure that we had what we needed. We were able to do this so quickly and so sort of comprehensively because he blocked for us. He made sure that, you know, issues kind of got out of our way. So I'd say that from an executive level, that's the greatest value add is saying, look, I'm going to set this in motion and make sure that the path is clear. But if you're not an executive or if you're trying to convince other executives, everyone thinks this is, you know, is a great thing. Nobody is like, I mean, maybe some people. Most people are not going to come out and say like, I hate transparency or I think it's a really stupid idea. That's just not the feedback that you're going to get. So if you're able to sort of say, this is the concept, this is what it looks like in action, let's do it with this issue that's important to you, you've created a way to get buy-in. So.
So when you're using other departments' data, I imagine some of the issues may have come into, we'll use addresses. Different departments recorded the addresses differently. When you were doing your data cleansing process, how did you work with departments to get them consistent? And did you then end up doing like a data dictionary or a data format that they have to do in the future?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things. The first step that's a great question, that's an important question. Because if you can get your data to come in clean and you don't have to clean it, that's ideal. Quality at the source is like really great. That's usually hard to do, especially if you are using sort of a software that's been used forever. If I don't have like a user interface developer on my team, so I can't go in and like force police and fire to validate their addresses. I don't have the capacity to do that. So what I can do instead, there's sort of two things. The first is spend a lot of time and energy and resources cleaning that data, but the second is showing them what happens when you have clean data. You can say, look, we spell Vine Street here the same way that we spell Vine Street in our blight data. Congratulations, we all, sort of congratulations, like now you can see what other people are doing, what other departments are doing. That's usually, this is what you can do with this now. Now that you know all these things, now that we know we're spelling Vine Street the right way, you're able to actually record how many times you've gone to this same house or the same address or the same place. So once you start seeing the value add, it's not a hard sell, and that's also where you start getting creative ideas on the operation end in terms of like how can we make sure that we can use this and this is sort of optimal. So in an ideal world, the data quality coming in would be really great. That would make my life easier. Or even if even using the same neighborhoods across departments, that would also make my life easier, but it's not. So it's a lot of kind of processing it and then saying, look, we did this with your data, now it's usable. Is the data quality great and important? So.
Ryan, Department of State. What kind of liaison or help or resources can you pull from Ohio? Is that a resource for you?
From the state of Ohio? We really haven't pulled any. It would have been great if we had been able to, though. So, yeah, right now, even if there was some kind of grant funding for putting database administrators or data architects really, or even analysts or something into into municipalities, that would have been really helpful for us. Right now, there's really not a ton of resources. They've actually started looking at us and saying like, oh, this is really great. Maybe we could do this with our data. So, which I'm like, you definitely could. So it's as when we started this, there really wasn't a lot there, but I think increasingly states are understanding the importance of resourcing local governments this way. All right, great. Thanks so much.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leigh, for sharing all of this with us. As I said, this is inspiring, and this is the kind of information that we see coming back from you guys when we talk to you about the plans you've made. Rich Tobe talked about the almost 400 projects you've identified to work together with as counties and municipalities. This is what is inspiring innovation at its very best. With that, we are going to take a short break, and at 11 o'clock we're going to start the panel workshops across the hallway in the classrooms, 3 and 4, I think, right? 4 and 5. 4 and 5. And we'll have lunch at noon. That will be in room 2.
There's coffee available at 10:45 where the breakfast was.
Yes. Did you get that? Coffee available at 10:45. I hope everyone got yourself a packet. We do have the agenda in here. You can see what is listed as far as the panel discussions. There is information about all of the presenters today. Also, there's information about the Division of Local Government Services. We have 3 training programs. We've got obviously grant resources. We have an amazing listing of free publications on our website. There's some feedback in the packet about that. So look through the packets, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much.